Okay, Saint Sharbel, when he left Bar Kafra, he went to the monastery of Mayfoot. He left Bar Kafra in 1851, 20 years after the death of his father. Actually 20 years to the actual day, on the 8th of the 8th, 1851. He entered, and what happens is that you join the novitiate, and it's 2 years of novitiate, and then you continue your studies. So Saint Sharbel in his first year of novitiate was in Mayfoot, and then he went to Anaya for his second year of novitiate. After pronouncing his vows in 1853, he then went. It's not believed. It's thought that he didn't begin his theological studies straight away, because there were only 3 years of theology, and he was ordained 6 years after his vows. So there's the thought that he may have stayed in Anaya for maybe 3 years and then continued his theological studies. His theological studies took place in the monastery of Saint Cyprian and Justina in Kfifan. And at the time in that monastery, there were 2 monks who were in charge of the studies. There were the monks Na'amtallah al-Kafri, who was a master of Syriac studies and biblical studies, and he speaks highly of Saint Sharbel as a very intelligent student. And there was also the Saint Na'amtallah al-Hardini, who was a teacher of moral theology and scripture as well. And there's always been that connection that Saint Na'amtallah was the teacher of Saint Sharbel. And so it's the meeting of the 2 saints, which takes a large part of Saint Sharbel's life and the focus of Saint Sharbel's life as well. And then he was ordained in 1859 in Pkirki, in the patriarchal center. And then after that he entered the monastery of Anaya, and he lived 16 years in Anaya. And of course in Anaya he lived a common life following the rule of the order, and that was basically the secret of his sanctity, is that he followed the rules of the order. And so he was very obedient. He lived his poverty and his chastity, and he lived in manual labor and in the common work and prayer of the monks as well. And he was known for his obedience, and especially that he obeyed the other brothers as well, not just the superior. On top of that, we're reminded in Anaya of the miracle that he performed with the lamp. So basically his lamp was filled with water, not with oil. This was probably a trick done, probably a little prank played on him by some of the workers, but he lit his lamp anyway, even with water. So he didn't need the oil anyway. So that didn't work as far as the prank is concerned. But it showed that Saint Sharbel did have a special relationship with God. And then he joined the Hermitage in 1875. We talked about some of the practices of the hermit, but as far as the rules are concerned, the hermit was only allowed to have 5 hours of sleep, and the rest of the time was devoted to prayer and manual labor. And so he prayed his 7 prayers, and it was devoted also to fasting. So he couldn't eat meat or drink milk or any dairy products, for the rest of his life. So his life was basically vegetables, when his food was only vegetables, and he only ate once a day at 2 p.m. And the Hermitage mean that the eremitical life in the Hermitage, he wasn't on his own at the time. There were 2 other monks with him, so he was living not a communal life, but he was here with monks. And the life that they lived was that everything was in silence. So it was a private life, but there was also other monks, and that really is an expression of Syriac monasticism. Even the hermits during the first centuries of Syriac monasticism, they weren't alone. So there was also other monks with them. So it was a mini community of hermits, and that was part of the order as well. This actual hermitage was founded by 2 people here from Hermitage, who are descendants of a village called Ain Hilya in Syria. On top of that, the descendants of Bar Kafra, or their ancestors, came from that same village in Syria. So I don't know if there's a bit of providence in that, as though the ancestors of Saint Sharbel built this hermitage for one of their own children to come and to become a saint here. So there's a bit of providence in that as well. On top of that, here in the Hermitage, on top of the the very strict rules, there was the midnight prayer that took place, that when the hermit prayed, he would pray at midnight and would not go back to sleep. So that's why we talk of Saint Sharbel spending 5 hours of preparation or 6 hours of preparation for his Mass, because he was praying his midnight prayer. That prayer is an expression of the prayer of Jesus Christ, who himself at night would leave his disciples, would go up to the mountain to pray. And on top of that, he asked his disciples on the night before he died to keep watch and pray. So the idea of keeping watch is very much the life of the hermit. He keeps watch during the night. During the day, of course, there is his prayers, but during the night where everyone's asleep, there's still people who are praying for the world, and those are the hermits. So Saint Sharbel lived those long nights in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament, before Jesus Christ in the Blessed Sacrament. And that's very much how he got to know Christ, in his prayer life. So Christ prayed at night, Saint Sharbel prayed at night. So he shared his prayer life with Jesus Christ. And in that sense, he became a saint because he became more like Jesus Christ. Saint Sharbel, he died on the 24th of December, but he was bedridden before that for 8 days. What happened was on December the 16th, it was a Friday, he was celebrating his Mass as per usual in this Hermitage right here, roughly around noon. And he was celebrating the Mass with the 2 other hermits that were with him at the time. While celebrating the Mass, he got to the part of the fraction where they actually break the host. And in the Maronite liturgy, that resembles the death of Jesus Christ on the cross. There's a prayer also back in Saint Sharbel's days that was prayed while the host was elevated and broken. It was a prayer written by Saint Jacob of Serug, who was around in the 6th century. The prayer called Father of Truth, behold your Son, a sacrifice pleasing to you. While Saint Sharbel was holding the host, the broken host, in his hand and praying this prayer, he had a stroke. And of course he was 70 years of age at the time, but I wouldn't say, and so many people say, that it wasn't because of his old age, and it wasn't because of the cold and the different terrible weather conditions of this hermitage, but it was because I think during that time there's been this image that he may have had an experience of God, a mystical experience with Jesus Christ, and especially in his passion and death. In the Old Testament, it says in the book, in the first 5 books of the Bible, it says that anyone who sees God face to face cannot remain alive. And so that's probably the experience that Saint Sharbel had at that time. He was so much in union with Jesus Christ, and especially during that Mass, that he was in union with Jesus Christ at his death, that he shared that death experience with Christ. And so he had a stroke and was bedridden for 8 days. During those 8 days, he continued that prayer. He continued to repeat that prayer, Father of Truth, behold your Son. And he also repeated the names of Our Lady and Saint Joseph. Repeating that prayer kept him in union with Christ in his dying moments. So he wanted to share that death, that experience with Christ as much as possible. So that's why he continued that prayer. That Mass that he celebrated on December the 16th didn't end. But what's beautiful is that when Saint Sharbel passed away, when he died on December the 24th, he continued that Mass in heaven with the heavenly banquet, the heavenly liturgy. It's said that Saint Sharbel entered heaven on December the 24th, 1898, but heaven was in him before that. So he was entering something that he knew, that he was all too familiar with, and that's the idea of his sanctity. On top of that, Saint Sharbel, he died on December the 24th, and we don't celebrate his feast day on December the 24th because it comes in line with Christmas. So we've moved his feast day to July, which was moved by the church, July the 23rd, or the 3rd Sunday of July here in Lebanon. And so Christ's birth was his birth in heaven. So in his death, he's resembling Christ in his birth and in his death as well, and in his resurrection. because afterwards there was the great light that shone from his tomb. When they buried him and they kept him in the church, the monks saw light coming from the tabernacle shining on Saint Sharbel's face. And then when they buried him for the first time with the other monks, they saw a light shining from his tomb. So that's very much reflecting Jesus Christ during his death and his resurrection, because there was the great light from Christ's tomb at his resurrection as well. So Saint Sharbel was seeing in his life, he emptied himself of himself to become more like Jesus Christ. So that's why when people come here, they come for Saint Sharbel, but Saint Sharbel shows them to Jesus Christ. And that's like in the Song of Songs where it says, "Come, have you seen the one whom my soul loves?" So we're coming to Saint Sharbel. Saint Sharbel's telling us, look at Jesus Christ. It's like John the Baptist as well, who says he must increase, about Christ. He says he must increase and I must decrease. That's the spirituality of the order. Our patron, one of the patron saints of the Lebanese Maronite order, is Saint John the Baptist, and for that reason. On top of his ascetic practices, Saint John the Baptist, he finished his mission when Jesus started. And that's the idea of the monk. Our life in mission is for the sake of Jesus Christ. But when Christ takes over, the monk steps aside and goes back to his monastery. And that's what happened with John the Baptist. And that's the spirituality of Saint Sharbel as well. So he was filled with the life of Christ based on the rules of the order and the spirituality of the order. After his death, there was of course his body that remained intact. And his body was taken and relocated in several different places at the request of the patriarchs at the time.